In this Citizen Science for All event, we will be talking about citizen science and astronomy. Astronomy is one of the oldest sciences and the reason many people get interested in science. Astronomy today studies not just the stars, but fascinating things large and small from our own planet skies to across the vast universe. Amateurs and citizen scientists have always made important contributions to astronomy. Citizen science has been recently defined in lay terms as a scientific work undertaken by members of the public with or under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institutions. Citizen science has seen a massive growth with hundreds of thousands of volunteers worldwide collecting data and a massive availability of relevant data collection and citizen science platforms to support citizen scientists. Today, we have three speakers to discuss very different ways to involve the public in this beautiful topic. We will start with Osnat Katz, a third-year PhD researcher working on the history of UK space science. Osnat studies the roles astronomy plays in wider society and has worked as an orbit tutor, encouraging school students to become researchers in their own right and explore the intersections between science and society. She's a fierce believer that science is for everybody. She will talk about the orbit scheme at UCL and her studies of space history with young people. Our second speaker is Dr. Liz McDonald. Liz works for NASA at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. She has been studying the aurora for 25 years, has led teams which build instruments to measure charged particles in the space environment, and now she leads a citizen science project called ERASMUS, which tracks and predicts the aurora. In 2018, Liz announced the discovery of a new type of aurora, and in 2019, she began collaborating with a unique citizen science mission called Hearts in the Eyes, which studies the aurora from polar regions. She will talk to us about ERASMUS. Our final speaker is Dr. Karen Masters. Karen is a professor of astronomy and physics at Haverford College. She's a principal investigator for the Galaxy Zoo project, one of the most productive citizen science projects in existence, which uses large sky surveys to study galaxies, a group of millions of stars which have distinct shapes and histories. Karen researches how galaxies form and evolve using both visible lights and radio waves. She won the UK Woman of the Future Award in 2014. Karen will be talking to us about Galaxy Zoo. We will be able to take some questions after the talk, so you can post your questions in the Zoom chat or on Twitter, where my colleague Alice will be live tweeting the event. Thank you very much. And Osnat, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen now, and then we can get started. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Fab. In that case, I am going to get started now. My talk is about a UCL project called Orbits, which is all about doing astronomy research in schools and how this can fit into citizen science. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of my talk first. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am. I'm going to talk in a little more detail about what the Orbits project entails. I'm going to talk about what I facilitated with two different cohorts of 16 and 17-year-old students. And I'm going to talk a bit about why I think this is useful and why I think anyone should care. So let's get started. Who am I really? Well, Artemis has very kindly introduced me, but I'm just gonna reiterate, I am a space historian. I research the social and cultural history of space science in the UK. That is to say, I don't just look at what got put on rockets and satellites when. I look at why people built these rockets and satellites, why people built this space hardware, how they built the space hardware. I look at what they believe in and I look at how they act, and I look at how that informs how space science in the UK gets done. So I spend a lot of my time investigating essentially how culture influences science and how science influences culture, and how there are actually lots of different cultures that influence science, and how scientific results can produce lots and lots more different cultures and discipline. So for me, science and wider society are not separate things. It's not like you have science here and society there. It's more like a big, fuzzy, beautiful mess. And I spend lots of my time trying to explain how that mess works. So, what is Orbits even? Orbits, which is a research program for schools that UCL has been running for quite a few years now. We partner 16 and 17-year-olds with real researchers to do real research. So for example, I am doing my PhD and I have worked with schools. There are also postdocs who work with schools. It's open to both the Department of Physics and Astronomy and the Department of Space and Climate Physics. So it's two different departments at UCL who are doing this. And what will happen is schools will say, hey, I want to work with you. I want some of our students to do this. And a PhD researcher or a postdoc like me will get partnered with a partner teacher who looks after a group of about 8 to 10 students. And then from about November to about May, we work with the students for 1 to 2 hours every couple of weeks to help them produce real research. Usually this is quantitative astronomical research. Mine is a bit different just because my topic is a bit different. So far, out of the hundreds of students that have participated, there have been more than 10 research publications published in peer-reviewed journals. And this is a really big deal, because if it's a really big deal for someone who's doing their PhD or a postdoc to get published, imagine how big of a deal it is for someone who's not even out of school yet to be contributing to this kind of research. It's also really good for the students in general. More of them will take science and technology and engineering mathematics subjects at school and at university. They get to see what research is really like, so they have more of an idea of whether they'd like to do it or not. And they get to see something that's beyond the world of school and exams and classes, which is really, really important when you're a young person. And so far, this has been most of your life. So I've explained a little bit about what Orbits is. Now I'm going to talk about my projects, or rather the students' projects. I worked with a school in East London called Beale High School. And the first year that I ran these projects, I decided that I wanted to do something about attitudes to astronomy. And the reason for this is there are a lot of quantitative astronomical projects, as I said before. Many quantitative astronomical projects analyzing lots of different astronomical data. So I wanted to do something different. I wanted the students to get an experience of doing some quantitative research, but I also wanted to get them to do some qualitative research. So learning a bit more about how you can work with attitudes and figure out what people want, figure out what someone doing quantitative research does all day, and also to learn that science and society really aren't separate. They intertwine they influence each other. You don't have to be in one camp or the other. You can do lots of really interesting interdisciplinary research. So that's really what I wanted to work with these students. And then year two, second year I did this, 2020 to 2021. Of course, we were in the throes of the pandemic and of multiple different lockdowns. So I wanted to explore what attitudes to astronomy are like under lockdown to see if this had changed anything. And so as part of this, I wanted the students to be able to learn about how to design surveys, how to ask the right kinds of research questions, how to ask target audience the right kinds of research questions, how to learn about what kind of samples are and aren't representative, how to do basic work with coding, because this is really important for a lot of quantitative researchers, and also how to communicate results effectively. Even though it's not necessarily a quantitative astro project and thus doesn't necessarily have the prestige of a quantitative astro project, I still wanted them to get useful skills out of it. So now I want to talk about what we did with the students in the first year, 2019 to 2020. All of these students were 16 and 17 years old. They were in their first year of what in the UK are A-levels. So the first year of a set of 2-year qualifications that you get at the end of your time at school. They were all STEM students, so they were all doing things like physics and maths, and we had picked them that way deliberately. They were really intrigued and they were really curious when they found out that they were going to be doing survey design and that they were going to be looking at people's attitudes to astronomy. In particular, I remember there was one student who really wanted to investigate the beliefs of flat earthers and was really highly motivated to do this. So it was really nice to see that there was motivation and appetite amongst these students to see how science and society intersect and to figure out more about attitudes to astronomy. That year, we had a mix of online and in-person teaching in what I will frankly call the worst way possible, because up until about March, all of the teaching was done in person, and that was fine. And then the pandemic hit and lockdown happened, and we were all forced to shift online right at the very end. As we were going to have the conference, it really affected the students' motivation. It really affected my motivation as well. And to be very honest, people didn't really know what we were doing. So it was very much a trial by fire. But it was a trial by fire that we learned from for the second year. So in the second year, things changed considerably. Because we were still in the throes of the pandemic, it was all online. In some ways, this was quite challenging because, for example, teaching programming online is very difficult because you can't necessarily go around to see what students are doing, and you don't get that sort of in-person interaction where people feel free to ask you questions. It's a lot more asynchronous, and the communication you do have has to be a lot more intentional. So that really changes things. We also had a different mix of students, whereas the previous year's cohorts were all physics and maths A-level students. these students were doing a mixture of maths, physics, sociology, and psychology. And actually, that mix was really helpful because all of the students were coming in with different perspectives on how they would ask questions about attitudes to astronomy under lockdown. They were all coming in with different, they were all coming in with different ideas about survey design, different ideas about how to get representative samples, different ideas about how they would communicate their results. And so getting them to discuss with each other and getting them to reflect in weekly logbooks was really helpful. So at the end of this, what did we learn? I got every student to do their own survey. So we had a lot of essentially really intriguing pilot studies that were all looking at different demographics. The main ones are that attitude to astronomy change with age in really interesting ways. For example, a lot of the youngest participants in the surveys, those who were about 18 years old, if you start getting below 18 years old, you start to get into thornier data collection issues. What the students found was that younger participants don't always differentiate between astronomy and astrology. They will describe themselves as very spiritual. One respondent described themselves as psychic, actually, which was really interesting because someone like me, who is really steeped both in history of science, but also in lots of science enthusiast communities, might think, oh, these two things are really separate. And in fact, what the students found was that a lot of the older participants, particularly a lot of their teachers and things as well, had this really sharp delineation, but younger participants didn't. And I think this speaks to changing generational attitudes towards astronomy. They had mixed findings about how attitudes to astronomy changed specifically over lockdown, in that it appears to have more pushed people who already liked astronomy into doing more astronomy, but didn't necessarily do that much else. So we had a lot of really intriguing pilot studies. These were communicated quite effectively in the form of a 10-minute presentation. It was very interesting working with the students on that because it was the first external presentation that any of them had done, really. And they got to show off their results to not just other students their age, but to really keen professional astronomers who were really excited to see what they had to say. So that was pretty good for them. Certainly, my students from year 2, who I kept more in touch with, had really positive things to say about the Orbits program. They put it on what's called their personal statement, which is a statement of application to universities that shows your aptitude and passion for studying the subject. So it does seem to have been good for them in that way. And now I'm going to waffle on about some conclusions. So the first thing I'll say is that this talk has been really me-centric. It hasn't really been centered on the students. And in fact, the whole thing of Orbits is it's cast very much in terms of teaching students how to do real research. And these two words, teaching and real, are doing a lot of work because it implies that you have this expert, say me, as a PhD student, well, as a PhD researcher or a postdoc, and that we are imparting knowledge to these young people in the ways of doing this sort of scientifically approved, prestigious research. And in many ways, that's a really good thing, because the students are learning new skills and they're getting a window into a world that they might not otherwise see. But it can also be problematic because there are parts of it that imply that these students are so young, they're so naive, they don't know anything. We've got to fill their heads with stuff. And that's one of the reasons that I really wanted them to develop their own research questions and to figure out their own target populations to look at, because these young people do have agency. They should have quite a lot of agency. They should be learning quite a lot. And they will learn the most when they are self-directed and they're doing their own thing. And that can be a little bit counterintuitive to learn how to be a researcher when you're still in school. Because when you're still in school, as they are, a lot of what they're learning is write down what the teacher says, do the problems that the teacher and the textbook have set, get the right answer, obey all these rules, and then you can go to a good university. And research in many ways is quite, it runs quite counter to that, because you're not just listening to what the teacher or lecturer says. You go out there and learn. You formulate your own questions to which there might not be easily available answers. You have to take the risk that you're not going to know stuff. You're going to get things wrong. You're going to fail, and then you're going to get back up on your feet and try again. And that is really counterintuitive for a bunch of very shy 16 and 17-year-olds who are also going through a massively, frankly, quite surprising and traumatic set of events in the form of the pandemic. They had to learn something that was really counter to everything they thought they knew, and they had to build, well, I had to build trust with them. Building trust was so important to doing this research. It remains so important for getting them to come out their shell, to do all this stuff. And the work they do is really important because they've got to look at populations that people like me couldn't look at, because it's not within my scope, because I don't know the populations they're looking at. But they do. They have these links. They have these really important community links. And so the work they do is really valuable. And it took a lot of trust on both sides to get them to be able to do that work. And it also took a lot of trust to learn some really counterintuitive skills. But in the end, I do think we did some really important work, some really important pilot studies that I really hope can be built on. Thank you very much for listening to me talk for like 20 minutes about doing research in schools.
Thank you very much, Osnat. Our second speaker is Liz. So Liz, if you want to start sharing your screen when you're ready.
Okay, good evening or morning, if it's morning where you are. I am about to share my screen here. So I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation covering like many different aspects of citizen science and astronomy and how it pertains to society today. So really appreciate what Osnat was speaking about. And what I'm going to be speaking about, stop me if you can't see the screen properly, is observations of the aurora borealis, both the northern and southern lights, by these amazing enthusiast communities all over the world. You can see some of the photographs here from a great photographer in Alberta, Neil Zeller, who traveled to the Yukon to capture these. But basically, these photographs that are motivated by beauty also have all kinds of scientific aspects and value as well. So that is what our project was designed to bring together. Yes, and the aurora is also, can be, this is one of my favorite astronaut quotes about the aurora, that it's a burrito of awesomeness smothered in awesome sauce. So I like that one. And when you can see the aurora from space, that's really cool. It's also very cool to see from the ground as well, and more people can see it than we realize. So our project is called Aurorasaurus, and I want to acknowledge we have support from NASA as well as the National Science Foundation. And I also have my great project manager on the call here on Zoom here. And she might be able to answer any questions that may come up or help provide links if I've missed things. So I also want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional homelands of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Oregon. And I'm in southeastern Washington here. And I also want to acknowledge their stewardship of the land from time immemorial. And I think that as part of that, most of what I'm talking about here is Western science knowledge about the aurora. And there's still a very big piece that we're missing, that we're all missing, that is other knowledge as well. So that's important, something important that's been more important in the last few years during the pandemic as well. Okay, next, a little bit about me, a few pictures to go along with some of the bio. So I am not an aurora photographer. I am not, that's not my skills, but I've studied the aurora with instruments since I was in college, and then going on to graduate school. I worked on rockets that fly above the aurora and measure the particles and the exciting sort of plasma physics that drives these fantastic shapes. And then I spent several years at Los Alamos National Lab, and I worked on satellite instruments that study those processes farther out in space as well. And then back in 2011, there was a really well-timed storm of aurora coming down to lower latitudes that was very well timed for the US Eastern Seaboard as darkness fell. This very large event happened to be mostly red aurora. Red aurora can be seen way further south than it usually is because it's extremely high up. And so I got on Twitter and noticed that people were actually tweeting about the Northern Lights all the way down to like Alabama. And that just sparked the idea that we needed to put these observations on a map. And that led me to learning about citizen science and ways to create a platform, utilize the web and platforms and apps and smartphones to gather this information and put it out so more people can use it for their own decision of whether they're going to be able to chase aurora or not. So this really, I think citizen science across many different fields is able to be disruptive innovation. And we didn't really know that at the time, and we formally launched the project in 2014, but I will tell you about discoveries that have been made with the project as well. So it's exciting to be able to share that with you. And also this community, I think, here online today knows a lot about citizen science already. NASA is doing more and more with citizen science. So if you want to join us, there's actually a free webinar series for citizen science project leaders and resources on starting projects. So I have a few websites for that. And then as well, some insights, maybe not insights, but facts about citizen science projects and the ways that they really enable, as Osnat was talking about, empowering questions about science. And that's two-way questions. Those aren't the questions that like I already think are the most important questions. But we really want to build relationships with communities of citizen scientists. And, you know, as part of doing that, citizen science can form that critical bridge. And there's people who understand both sides of that, and people like Laura, project manager for Aurorasaurus, who are really critical enablers for that happening. Okay, so I'd love to learn a little bit about you, but we are in a virtual world here, so I'm just going to ask you to put some answers to these questions in the chat. For instance, if you have taken part in citizen science with Auroras, please, we're happy to recognize that. And also, if you've seen Aurora, if you'd like to take part in citizen science with Aurora, or you just, you know, what kind of citizen science you do, that would be great. So yeah, I will keep going because I sort of have too many slides here. So, all right, what is Aurora? So Aurora is the very last step in a really big process that starts at the sun and creates these visible lights from invisible processes, largely invisible processes that travel from the sun to the earth. And so it's very difficult to predict that kind of distance with the few satellites that we have that can cover the space in between. So people actually can, and their reports from the ground, and all of the photos, I think almost all of the photos in this presentation are from citizen scientists. Those can help. There are always more people than there are clouds, and so that people can report where the aurora are visible and help others. This is a little bit of a movie about that process from the sun to the earth. The sun is always releasing particles, not just light, but charged particles. Those follow the sun's magnetic field, couple with the earth's magnetic field, store energy in the earth's magnetic field that gets basically periodically released in different ways towards the poles, and then impacts the upper atmosphere and causes these lights. So I have another little interactive question here, which you can put your answers in the chat because I'm going to, these are all observations of aurora during 2021 by an extraordinary citizen scientist from the northern part of Washington state. And what do you notice about all of these photographs? They're all throughout the year. This is not a time when the sun is super active, so it's often surprising to people that you could see this much aurora during the year. You can see different, you know, patterns perhaps in the dates that were observed. And then you can also notice some things about why this person may be like just an extraordinary citizen scientist who has some advantages. His location, for one, that helps him capture these observations of aurora. So yeah, feel free to say more things about what you noticed. I can't actually see the chat, but we'll get to that. Okay, so the aurora and the colors of the aurora, which you can see vary quite a bit from those photographs, are caused by interactions with the really, really high upper atmosphere, the edge of space. And the edge of space, there's mostly oxygen up there, and there's particles following the Earth's magnetic field lines, electrons. They're impacting the atoms and molecules at the upper edge of space and causing these different colors, these different characteristic colors. And then there's kind of a collisional process of that energy being deposited into the atmosphere, and more and more light being produced as the atmosphere gets thicker, which is why the aurora kind of stops all of those particles at about 100 kilometers. All right, that's already said. So then there's all these different types of aurora, and we asked people to say something about the different types of aurora when they submit reports as well. And they often notice that those different types vary in intensity, they vary in time of night, and the aurora happens basically all the time at high latitudes, and then your location is going to rotate under this oval that's happening and changing in space. And so there's all sorts of different interactions with the magnetosphere and the particles in the Earth's magnetic environment that cause that. But one really exciting new kind of aurora on here is called Steve. And this is a spectacular photo of Steve by an observer in Alberta. And I will talk more about that in just a minute. All right, we do have a blog where we talk a lot about, well, we both have kind of basic answers to aurora on the website, as well as a blog where we go into more depth on really cool things that our citizen scientists and the auroral research community are doing. So what can auroras tell us? They're actually important indicators of the space weather environment, which can have effects on society, costly effects, and effects on satellites. So it is important to characterize them. Now a little bit about what is Steve and the story of what is Steve. So you can see a really great time lapse here from Nitani Barasa. Sorry, I don't know where. Oh, his name is hopefully showing up there, from Alberta. And citizen scientists started noticing these strange looking aurora and talking to us and other scientists up in Calgary about what this was. And we basically said, we don't know what that is. Could you please keep taking photographs? And over a period of time in 2016 and even 2015, just the whole community, especially around Alberta and the Alberta Aurora Chasers, which is a really great Facebook group, kept taking observations. And then we got a great event where we got satellite observations as well.
And we started noticing something that
I'm gonna just keep talking since I've already told half the story and it's my little video here. But basically the aurora is was being visible to the north from places like Calgary. And this Steve was this ribbon overhead from east to west. And it's mostly purple, although it's really gray to the naked eye. And there's also these little green auroral features that look completely crazy as well. And so the aurora is mostly happening on the further out field lines, but we got some satellite observations going through the event. And what we realized is that these features that are causing this light have been studied before and are a very strong flow of particles in the upper atmosphere from east to west that we recognized but never knew was actually visible. And so that's extremely interesting. And it's a kind of a new boundary, a new observable at this far southern edge of the aurora. Most of the time, most of the field has spent a lot of time looking at the aurora and the high latitudes. And so it kind of tells you when citizen scientists are looking at a feature, a phenomena, they're not seeing the boundaries that we normally see. They're just really great at picking up on new features and documenting them. And through that, we've really learned a lot that's new here. And then the Steve story has gone viral several times. And the first paper was published in 2018 in Science Advances. After that point, a German physicist who has studied the historical observations of aurora got in touch with me and actually found that this had been documented by very old observations by a very big aurora scientist, Carl Stormer, who took some of the first photographs of aurora, and much like citizen science 100 years ago, had observers all over Norway and Scandinavia taking photographs and measuring the height of aurora. And so even though we all did very extensive literature searches as we were trying to figure out what Steve was, we missed these papers. And indeed, you can see some of the similarity in his photographs. And he called Steve feeble homogeneous arcs of great altitude. And that's an accurate description as well, based on as much as he could see in the technology that he had at the time. And then Michael Hunnicle, who's the extraordinary citizen scientist, he is a scientist in another field of physics, but he has also collected a whole ton of observations all across the internet from Aurora Source, as well as all the social media sources that are harder to collect from, and has his own list, and really has made some really remarkable observations, of continued observations that we're studying about how Steve forms and how these tiny little green features form and all kinds of interesting things. So I actually haven't talked too much about Aurora Source here, so a little bit about that. This is just one snapshot of some reports, and you can see that we have reports across Europe here, both positive reports, the green pins, negative reports, which are also really, really important, and tweets. And so we also have an algorithm to scrape Twitter for those observations that have a location and are real-time observations of aurora. And then on our website, you can go and contribute to verifying and upvoting those real-time aurora sightings as well for further verification. Let me see. I don't think this movie is going to work because it's not embedded, so I'm going to skip that for now. But you can see the reports kind of go across the world, and we're excited that now we're coming into the second solar maximum with citizen scientists and smartphones, and the amount of new observations that will be possible. Because nowadays people's cell phones actually can also take amazing aurora photographs. The iPhone 13 is great. And so that's going to increase observations as well. Okay, I'm sure I'm running out of time. So second to last slide here. These are some resources, particularly for younger audiences. And there's some more as well, like there's a great documentary, short documentary, Canadian female filmmakers made a documentary called Chasing Steve that talks to some of the many photographers across Alberta who contributed to that, and that's really great as well. As you have students who've studied Steve and its spectra, which is very unusual. And then also there's a really cool NPR podcast for very young students about an aurora named Steve. And I realize I haven't explained the name of Steve, but we'll put that in the chat and keep talking about that. But thank you all very much. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Liz. We are a little bit tight in terms of time, so I would like to quickly invite Karen to share your screen.
Sorry. Thank you.
It's very cool to hear about Aurora and scraping Twitter to do science. That's very cool. So Alice invited me to come here and talk about Galaxy Zoo and the Zooniverse. I'll try to be speedy, but also hopefully get to tell you a bit about what we've been doing with crowdsourcing in Galaxy Zoo for the last almost 15 years, which is pretty exciting. So my name's Karen Masters. I'm a professor of astronomy and physics here at Haverford College, which is in the outskirts of Philadelphia in the US. We're a small liberal arts college. So for Brits, I often explain it like a single Oxford college, just not embedded in a bigger university. That's kind of the feel this place has. And I've also been involved in Galaxy Zoo for a really long time now, not quite 15 years. I joined about a year after the project started, when I started to, there started to be data available from the citizen science and from the combining of the data, and I'll talk about how we do that, that we could start to do galaxy evolution science with it. And I sort of jumped in and did that, became the project scientist for a number of years. And then very recently I've taken over as a principal investigator, which is not really a great deal of difference in what I do, except sounds fancier, I guess. I don't know. Anyway. And Galaxy Zoo inspired something called the Zooniverse, which is now much bigger than Galaxy Zoo and does all kinds of crowdsourcing. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end as well. So just to get us started, what is a galaxy? I see some familiar names and faces here from the early days of Galaxy Zoo, so you'll know very well, but let's just make sure we're all on the same page about galaxies. So galaxies are kind of the building blocks of the universe. They're massive collections of stars, dust, gas, and dark matter floating out there in space. The universe is just full of galaxies. There's literally billions of them. We live in a galaxy, it's the Milky Way, and this background image here, every point of light you see in that image is a star in our own galaxy, and we're looking through that sort of foreground, actually, of dots of light of stars to this background of lots and lots of galaxies. The fuzzy blobs in this image are lots of galaxies in the direction of the Virgo cluster, which is a nearby large cluster of galaxies. So there's lots of galaxies out there, and they come in different shapes and sizes and types. Sort of the big picture, different types are spiral galaxies like these ones. So this is 5 images of galaxies that are called spiral galaxies because of the spirally structure they have. So it's very descriptive name, I guess. And then the other big type of galaxies is something we call an elliptical galaxy. So these are often oval or ellipse in shape, but the main feature is that they don't have features. They don't have these spiral arms. So what, you might say, why do we care about the shapes of galaxies? Well, it turns out it tells us something about the physical properties of the galaxy. A spiral galaxy has a 3D shape, a bit like a fried egg, a giant fried egg, right? It's very flat, and the stars in it are moving in circles around the center. And the spirals that you see are waves, traffic jams, kind of, in the motions of stars going around in this disk, in this sort of dinner plate fried egg shape. They often also have like a bumpy bit in the middle that's a bit more thicker, like the yolk of an egg. So a fried egg works really well for them. Whereas an elliptical galaxy is more like a bee swarm of stars. They're all going in random directions. Turns out they're triaxial. So what's triaxial? What a kiwi fruit is. So a kiwi fruit has 3 dimensions, as in it's not a circle, whichever way you cut it. And so elliptical galaxies are typically like that kind of shape. They're not spherical. They're kind of squished. Okay. So what did we know about galaxy evolution 100 years ago, or galaxy classification 100 years ago? This is kind of the picture of how it was done then. In astronomy, we took photographic plates or images of the sky, and someone like Edwin Hubble in this picture might look at 1,000 images of galaxies and publish a paper that we're still citing 100 years later about this classification scheme. So we call this the Hubble tuning fork. We arrange galaxies across this It doesn't really, or Hubble didn't intend it to imply any kind of evolution. This is not Hubble saying that elliptical galaxies are going to turn into spiral galaxies. He just kind of ordered it to classify things. So we separate ellipticals and spirals get 2 branches based on whether or not they have a bar. So a bar is this line that you see across the middle. And we'll come back to the ordering along the arms in a minute. But this worked great when we had small samples of galaxies, when you would painstakingly image one at a time. But things have moved on quite a lot since then in astronomy. So we like to talk about the digital revolution, and this survey called the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which is something I've been involved in also for a bit more than almost 15 years, is kind of one of the forerunners of this revolution in astronomy. So instead of photographic plates or taking images of small numbers of galaxies, sort of one at a time, SDSS did a survey where it scanned the entire sky for almost 10 years. It imaged about 40% of the sky as part of that process. And then it had this fiber optic system, or it has, I should say, it has this fiber optic system which let it measure spectra of lots of objects all at once. So why do we care about measuring the spectra? This is just a detailed rainbow splitting the light out that's coming from galaxies or stars or whatever you want to point your optical fiber at. It tells us a lot about the physical properties. So we get distances to galaxies, and we can get more information about their star formation history and the types of stars that are in them, and all kinds of things which let us understand the physical properties of the galaxy. So all of a sudden, thanks to SDSS, around 2007, we had images of 1 million galaxies and also information that would let us do galaxy evolution, let us kind of do statistical demographics of the galaxy population to try to understand galaxies. But we couldn't look at 1 million galaxies. There's just no way. That would be 1,000 Edwin Hubbles. I guess that's right? 1,000 is 1 million. And there were people who made valiant efforts to try to do this. Famously, a graduate student who was involved in the launching of Galaxy Zoo, which we'll get to as the solution to this problem, classified 50,000 galaxies as part of his PhD project. I know another astronomer who did on that order at the same time as Galaxy Zoo. So, people were trying, but some researchers at Oxford had this idea to invite members of the public to help with this problem. So Galaxy Zoo was launched. This was the original website from back in 2007. So how to look at 1 million galaxies is you ask people to help. This was the original tutorial. So this is saying there's a spiral galaxy here, the one that's got spirals in it, and an elliptical galaxy here. And now please tell us what you see in some random image of a galaxy where we don't know the answer. So in-person talks, I like to do like a show of hands who can classify some images. I don't know how well that'll work in Zoom, but let's have a go. So here's the galaxy, spiral or elliptical. Let's see, thumbs up for spiral, thumbs down for elliptical. No bias implied. None of you are playing. That's okay. Well, hopefully you can all internally decide this is a spiral galaxy. That's pretty easy, right? There are spirals in it. Here's another spiral galaxy. I'll give it away. So this is just a pretty one with a really nice big bar across it. This one's a bit more complicated, right? This is what a spiral galaxy looks like if you see it just perfectly edge on. So remember I said they were fried egg shaped. So in some spiral galaxies, you can't see the spiral. So sometimes we call them disk galaxies, but this is the same kind of galaxy. That 3D shape gives it away. A real elliptical kind of looks like a fuzzy blob, really no structure. And so again, if you look at that and you said, aha, that's an elliptical, I know that now, then you're right. And then there's some complicated galaxies. So this is my favorite complicated galaxy, the Sombrero galaxy. It has some of the features of an elliptical and some of the features of a disk galaxy. So if you asked a bunch of people to classify this after a simple tutorial, you probably get a bit of a mix of answers. That's what I typically have gotten in in-person talks. About half the audience will say spiral and half will say elliptical. And one of the cool things about Galaxy Zoo is that is not no information about what's going on in this image, right? That is information that tells us that this image is hard to classify. And images of galaxies can be hard to classify either because the galaxy is actually genuinely ambiguous or because the image is hard to classify. And so one of the things we have to do in Galaxy Zoo is separate those two pieces of information a little bit. So we ask many people to classify each galaxy. It's typically about 40. And we've done many phases of Galaxy Zoo at this point. So this is a very busy plot, but illustrating a classification from one of the phases of Galaxy Zoo. And you can see across the top, it's got GZ1, GZ2, GZ3 Hubble, all different kinds of things. So there's all different little visualizations for galaxies that have been classified in different versions. The first version was the simplest. It was just spiral or elliptical, but it worked so well that we got confident. We asked more complicated questions. So this is part of the second version, where we're asking for identification of various features in the galaxy after someone says they see features. So this is an example of a galaxy with a bar and spirals, and people are answering that. You know, in crowdsourcing, there's always someone who puts the wrong answer in. But in this case, if 39 and a bit people out of 40 have said they see features, we can be really confident there's features in this galaxy. It's not an integer number of people because we also downweight. If people consistently disagree with everyone else, we think they might be not doing it properly. Most people have weights very close to 1. So most people entirely, their contributions are counted. It's just people who always disagree with everyone who get downweighted. So this was a really popular project. So it's been running for 15 years. So this is a really old screenshot of the BBC News article from the day of launch in July 2007. It was the second most emailed, excuse me, story on the BBC website for a time. And the classifications per hour graph is kind of impressive. So there's this little blip early on, which was enough to bring down the Sloan Digital Sky Survey image server. And then there were some conversations about how to do it better, and then it really got started. But here we are at 40,000 classifications per hour, 40,000 people looking at galaxy images on the internet per hour for science, which is pretty cool. When we publish papers using the data that we collect through Galaxy Zoo, we thank people. So here's a little zoom in of the BBC article saying that we hoped about 30,000 people would take part. The first publications that came out for Galaxy Zoo thanked 160,000 volunteers. Here's one where we thanked 200,000 volunteers, 85,000 volunteers. We try to say thank you to our volunteers as much as we can. There is a story that the original paper describing what Galaxy Zoo would be attempted to submit with everyone as a co-author, but the journal didn't really want several hundred pages of co-authors, so it ended up not working out that way, but we try to include an acknowledgement to all the volunteers in every paper. So Galaxy Zoo has been running for 15 years. So we've classified pretty much everything in SDSS at this point. We also classified all public imaging surveys from the Hubble Space Telescope. That's a few 100,000 galaxies in that. And other surveys as well. So UKIDS is an infrared survey that was run out of the UK. Well, the telescope wasn't in the UK, but the survey team was in the UK. We've classified simulated images of galaxies in order to test the simulations and see how realistic the galaxies that they make are. Simulations of galaxies are getting pretty impressive these days. And currently what's live on the site is something called DECLS, the Dark Energy Camera Legacy Survey. It's much deeper, so it sees fainter galaxies than the SDSS, and it's a little bit better resolution, sharper images as well. So we actually think we'll have a few million galaxies in decals going through Galaxy Zoo. We've kind of evolved into basically a data analysis kind of tool. So anyone who has a galaxy survey who wants galaxy morphologies can work with Galaxy Zoo. Okay, so what have we learned thanks to all of this Galaxy Zoo stuff? Well, galaxies are kind of complicated and interesting. So let's go back to a bit of galaxy evolution again. So this is a Hubble tuning fork again, now illustrated with images from SDSS. And one thing you might notice is that these ellipticals are kind of orangey in color in this color image version, whereas the spirals are kind of bluish in color, right? You can kind of see that. And this is kind of the 100 years ago version of galaxy evolution had noticed this. So elliptical galaxies are red, which means they have older stars in them. They tend to be more massive as well, and more likely to be in high density parts of the universe, in clusters, we say. Whereas spiral galaxies are blue, which means they must have younger stars in them. They're less massive and they're not in clusters. Now I was going to explain why blue means young and red means old here, but I think I'm going to skip over that in the interest of time. If you're interested, I'm very happy to talk about it later, but it's a stellar evolution thing. It's pretty cool. It's because galaxies are made of giant collections of stars and stars have interesting properties. But I'll skip over that and say, if you do a big survey like SDSS, it's really, really easy to get the color in a sort of astronomer's version. So we have a way of making color by imaging galaxies through filters. That's what G-R means, it's 2 different filters. So up on this y-axis here is redder. And it's easy to get the brightness. And if you do that, you get a plot where they're not randomly distributed everywhere. And it turns out if you look at a few of these galaxies down here, the blue ones, they're spirals. And if you look at a few of these red ones, they're ellipticals. Let's break this down as a cartoon version. It's a little easier to see. So we're going to put the mass or the brightness or the size of the galaxy along here. So we're going to go from small on one side to big on the other side. And then we'll put the color in this direction. And so that tracks the age of the stars. So we're going to have blue or younger at the bottom and red or older stars at the top. So remember, galaxies are made of stars. So I'm talking about the age of the galaxy. So we have this blue cloud of spiral galaxies, and then this red sequence of elliptical galaxies, and this sort of place where most low mass things are blue and spirally, and most massive things are red and elliptically. And then there's this sort of gap in the middle. So that whole model that came about from sort of the Hubble classification scheme and early studies of galaxies led to this view of how galaxies change in the universe. So you form your spiral galaxies first. They're young, they're blue, and they're gonna, because they're gravitationally attracted to each other, they're eventually gonna merge. When they merge, they blow out all of their gas, they stop forming stars, and they turn into elliptical that will be red and dead. And this happens more often where there's more galaxies, hence why you've got more ellipticals in clusters. Sure. So at this point, I get to quote Alice with her wonderful poem, "Ellipticals are red, spirals are blue, or at least so we thought until Galaxy Zoo." So one of the big things Galaxy Zoo did was come in with a lot of classifications of the shapes of galaxies, a lot more than we had before. And if you do it for a lot of galaxies, you find that it is not true that all spirals are blue, and it is not true that there's no blue ellipticals. So this again is one of these color mass diagrams with the contours showing like density plot of where the points are. So you've got your blue galaxies and your red galaxies. This is for everything. If you separate it into ellipticals, called smooth here, because that's what we call them in Galaxy Zoo, and spirals, you can see that, you know, it's generally, most ellipticals really are red, but there's this tail of blue ellipticals. And most blue things are spirals, but there's a big tail of red spirals. There's a lot of spirals that are red. And so actually a lot of the work that I've done in Galaxy Zoo has been to do with red spirals and what's interesting about them and how they became red without turning into ellipticals. And we've proposed this sort of alternative cartoon of galaxy evolution, where instead of 2 blue spirals colliding to form a red elliptical, you might have to turn into a red spiral first before you could become a red elliptical. We have one other, I'm going to tell you one other example based on work that I've done where we're kind of Galaxy Zoo, just by the vast scale of the number of morphologies we're able to get through crowdsourcing, has kind of questioned, you know, the sort of understood wisdom about how galaxy morphology works. So back to Edwin Hubble and his tuning fork. Here in the spiral arms, you can notice in the cartoon here that the SA spirals, the ones that are closest to the ellipticals, kind of have a bigger yoke. And they go, and that yoke bit gets smaller. We call that the bulge. And the other difference is that the arms are really tightly wound here, and they get much looser. The same thing happens with the bars. The barred branch, you just also have a bar. And so this is taught in every classroom, that you have these galaxies with big bulges and tightly wound arms, and small bulges and loose arms. Galaxy Zoo, we asked those 2 questions totally separately. We asked volunteers to identify how big the bulge was, and we asked volunteers to identify how tight the arms were. We didn't ask them to put galaxies on this classification tree, because we wanted to do it kind of independently and just descriptively, like descriptions of what the galaxies are. To our surprise, there is no correlation between bulge size and arm winding in the galaxy population. And there's reasons why Edwin Hubble saw it, which have to do with how he imaged galaxies largely, I think. But Galaxy Zoo is sort of overturning another well understood thing that we knew about galaxies, but apparently we didn't, right? Because as soon as we have much bigger samples of morphologies, we're able to learn new things. Okay, marching on. I cannot possibly summarize the entirety of what we've done with Galaxy Zoo in any reasonable amount of time. I'm actually quite often asked to do that. And so I already have summary slides with lots of numbers on about how much science we've done. Apparently the publications page is not quite up to date, but we have about 70, 75 publications written by the team over the past 15 years. We're a pretty small science team, so I'm pretty pleased with that. We have a lot of papers with a lot of citations. You can kind of break these up into papers where we release the data publicly after we've done all the kind of processing and analysis, and we make these lists of galaxies for other researchers to use. We also have lots of papers on color and morphology, with papers on finding weird things in the galaxy population. Galaxy Zoo, people are really good at that. Computers tell you what you ask them to tell you. People tell you things they think are interesting. And so one of the real nice benefits of crowdsourcing morphology is you've got all these eyes looking at galaxies, and cool, weird things get found. And, you know, so one of the real, I think, testimonies to how much this has impacted astronomy is that galaxy zoo morphologies get used in papers with barely even a mention of where that came from. They do hopefully cite the data paper, but it's not a focus on the fact that they're crowdsourced morphologies. They're just morphologies that are being used for science. And so Galaxy Zoo has been used or mentioned in around 2,000 papers over the last 15 years, which is really cool. Says the same thing. We're not done because we're never going to be done imaging the sky. And so there will always be new images of galaxies to classify. As an example of that, there's something called Euclid, which is going to do images from space of a big fraction of the night skies. And estimates suggest 2 billion galaxies with the kind of image resolution that we had from Sloan, where we had 1 million. So that's a lot of Galaxy Zoo time. A lot of people use numbers like that to say Galaxy Zoo is over and we're going to have to move to the machines. In Galaxy Zoo, instead, we're trying to embrace the machines and put them in the loop with the people. Because it turns out machines need to learn what they're seeing, and humans are much better at learning what they see in images. So we can work with the crowd to train the machines to classify the boring, easy things. And then there'll always be unusual things that confuse the machine that will go back to the crowd. This is happening currently in Galaxy Zoo, and we're getting better and better at it. So we're going to be able to do larger and larger samples. Okay. So one of the cool early results from Galaxy Zoo, I thought, because I'm interested in why people would spend their time on this and what they're getting out of it, was this survey of the motivations of people who did Galaxy Zoo. And so by far the largest of these motivations was a wish to contribute to science. So something we learned from Galaxy Zoo was that people want to help scientists do real research, and there was a real market for this crowdsourcing citizen science online type of project. So Chris Lintott and other people launched the Zooniverse, which has launched with the tag of real science online, but really it meant real research online. So the Zooniverse has even been around for 12 years, and there's just now large numbers of projects. In 2015, they launched this thing called the Project Builder. So anyone with a Zooniverse account can go in and start a citizen science project. If you want it to be publicized by the Zooniverse, you have to go through a peer review process and get feedback and get it approved. This is a screen grab of the front page of the Zooniverse from yesterday. So there's currently 96 live approved projects on the Zooniverse, and you can go here and find projects in all areas from arts, biology, climate, all kinds of different things. This is just the 8 most recently launched of them. Killer whale count's fun. I like that one. But they share a lot of similarities in the functionality. So like you're asking questions, or you're clicking on images, or you're doing this kind of stuff. And so there's this background of software that the Zooniverse has that makes it very easy, a bit like editing a WordPress website, if you've ever done that. It's all in the browser, just fill in the boxes kind of thing to set up your citizen science project. I've done it a number of times with students, little projects, side projects. So there's 96 live projects that are advertised. I've been told there are thousands of projects that have been built that are just used privately in different ways, which I don't doubt. I have built many projects that I've never launched just to try things out. I was pleased to see that if you search on most popular, Galaxy Zoo is still #1. I don't know why, but it's awesome that it is. And so we still get 10 to 15,000 classifications a day in Galaxy Zoo. And so we're still able to go through galaxy classification really at a nice rate for these new surveys that are coming out. And just to wrap up, just to emphasize again, I think one of the real cool things that as an educator I'm particularly interested in is the ability to build your own project on the Zooniverse and to do your own crowdsourcing in small groups even. I think it's a really cool thing, and there's a lot of materials now on the Zooniverse to get people started on this. So thanks very much.
Thank you so very much to all the speakers. And